Welcome to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast. Today we are joined with Randall, Andy, special guest Jacob Infante. Jacob, it is your first time on a Draft Professor podcast. Welcome to the channel. How are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. I appreciate you having me, Jim, first and foremost. I know not a lot of people in my my Chicago Bears circle are really focusing on the 2026 draft right now. So I love any opportunity I get to talk about these prospects. So I really appreciate you having me.
Well, you are very welcome. We podcast on the draft here at Draft Professor literally every day. So it's really easy to find a draft podcast here. So today we are going to be going over edge big boards. And we have Randall, we have Andy, Jacob, myself. Randall, to the best of my knowledge, he's here, but I haven't seen him since we've gotten backstage. So we're just going to kind of dive in, and you can see on the podcast everybody's board. But one of the players that, Jacob, you have in your top 15 that nobody has is Damon Wilson Jr. Do you want to tell everybody about why you like him so much?
Yeah, so I'm at the point with Damon Wilson right now where a lot of it comes down to projection. Admittedly, he hasn't been a full-time starter at the collegiate level. He was a 5-star recruit coming out of high school, went to Georgia for 2 years, and then transferred to the University of Missouri, where he's going to play this coming year. I see a lot of potential with him. Ultimately, it hasn't fully come to fruition to this point. Hence the reason that he's, only 15th on my board as far as edge rushers go. But I think he's a tremendous athlete, which first and foremost, I think that's something that's going to endear him to a lot of NFL teams, a lot of scouts. I see someone who, he graded fairly well as a rotational rusher for Georgia last year. So I see someone who's explosive off the line of scrimmage, someone who can turn the corner well. And for someone who hasn't been a full-time starter, I see someone who he's shown some really encouraging flashes in terms of the repertoire that he has as a pass rusher. Rip moves, cross chops. I've seen him use a ghost move at, a time or two on tape. I like what he brings to the table from an athletic perspective and from a finesse standpoint as well. He's capable of rushing his stand-up. He's capable of rushing with his hand in the dirt. The reason that he's lower, one, obviously, is because he hasn't been a full-time starter in the league to this point. But also, I think that, the anchor needs to improve a little bit. He's a little bit light for an edge rusher, listed around 245 pounds. And that can hurt him sometimes when he's trying to set the edge in the run game. Bigger offensive linemen can generate some movement against him at the point of attack. And I think that, the pad level, you see the flexibility when he turns the corner, but in the pad level, he can sometimes pop up a little too high. So all that to say, Wilson's definitely a work in progress. And I think that this year is going to be huge for him. He still could return to college for another year, but I think that Wilson has serious NFL tools. It's just a matter of now, is that going to come to fruition? I think it can, because he has the athleticism to do it. He has the pass rushing know-how. It's just a matter of, can he sustain that over a full season as a full-time starter? So Damon Wilson's someone that I'm high on. Obviously, still kind of in wait-and-see mode with him, but he's someone that I see a lot of upside in for sure.
Yeah, that was definitely a name that, with the number of podcasts that we have done on defensive line, I will say that Damon Wilson Jr. was a new name. So I am really happy you came on the podcast, and we're starting off really strong. Anytime we can do a podcast where we can get a new name out in front of people, have other people watch them. But you heard it here first, right, from Jacob Infante on Damon Wilson Jr. So, Andy, one of the players that you have on your edge board that none of the other podcasters have is Samuel Okunlola from Colorado. You want to talk about him for a little bit?
Yeah, that's a name that we covered when I came on for the Colorado show. Really just a name that I was a big fan of last year, and I know it's an unpopular opinion, but I think that he is the best of the batch of Colorado edge rushers this year, stacked group. High-end athlete with good agility and speed, elite bend to consistently wrap around, put pressure on the quarterback, high motor, diagnosis plays very quickly, reads option plays fantastically, pushes the pocket to pressure QBs, collapses the pocket, all that stuff. Good frame. I think he has the ability to add more mass onto 6'4", 250 pounds. Good array of pass rush moves. And ultimately, I want to see the production go up, but I think it will this year. He only had 3 sacks last year as a rotational guy. Now should be a full-time starter for Colorado. And I'm really excited to see what he can do with that because I have high hopes for him.
Yeah, so I think, Andy, when we covered Colorado has, I think, 3 edges that they acquired in the portal?
Yeah,
right?
it's a deep group this year for sure.
Yeah. So there's Okunlola, and then you may hear some things about other Colorado edges maybe 4 months later, such as like Arden Key. I think Owen really liked Arden Key, but that's more of a projection as well. So we're going to pivot back to Jacob. So Jacob, one of the other players that you had that was relatively high compared to the other people on the podcast was Texas A&M edge Cassius Howell. Do you want to talk about Howell for a minute?
Definitely. So I'm intrigued to see what Howell can do. I think last year you take a look at that Texas A&M defensive line. Obviously, there's a lot of talent there. You're seeing, Nick Scorton, Shamar Stewart, both rushing off the edge. There's some instances you had Shamar Turner there. So Howell was really in, more of a rotational sort of role. It was that bowl game. I'm trying to remember exactly who it was against, but I know in the bowl game he was really productive. When Scorton and Stewart didn't play, he also was really productive at Bowling Green. Had 9.5 sacks as a redshirt sophomore in 2023. Transferred to A&M in 24, was more of a rotational guy than a full-time contributor. But Howell I see is someone who's I love his explosiveness. He's another guy. He's very good closing speed. I think his, the short area quickness as well as the long speed in his pursuit gives him, impressive range and just general explosiveness as a pass rusher. I think he does a pretty good job of keeping his pads low, keeping his knees bent and his weight underneath him. That's something where, even if he isn't the biggest edge rusher out there or the most powerful edge rusher out there, I think that he can make up for it sometimes with his pad level and his flexibility. He's a crafty pass rusher too. He's got a killer spin move. He's got a good, cross chop, swims, rips, good handful of ways that he can beat you at the point of attack. I think obviously he's another guy like Damon Wilson, where he wasn't a full-time starter last year. He has a little bit more of a resume from his time at Bowling Green, but Howell is someone that I'm really interested to see how he can do at this A&M offensive line, A&M defensive line rather, because 2024 he had a 91.4 PFF pass rushing grade. Granted, that's not in a full-time starting role, so it remains to be seen how he'll do with a higher workload. But I see a lot, I see the finesse with Cassius Howell. I see the explosiveness. And, now it's just a matter of, can he get a little bit bigger? Can he get a little bit stronger? Can he improve how he sets the edge against the run? And can he have some of that success that he had at Bowling Green and translate it to a full-time starting role at Texas A&M? I think it's definitely possible. Obviously this early in the process, grades are extremely tentative. I have him like roughly as a day 2 prospect going into this year, but the resume definitely plays a role in him being knocked down a bit. I see potential for him to rise into the first round if he has another great season, like he had in Bowling Green 2 years ago. So I see a lot of potential with him. He's someone that I think could really break out onto the scene as a bigger name this time by the end of the regular season.
Yeah, and Jacob, I think that That's a really good statement, right? As far as summer scouting, there's a significant amount of projection. What I get out of these exercises are these are the names to watch. It's not that player A is better than player B. We're maybe projecting these 15 players I like more than whoever the 16th player is. But I wouldn't take any rankings of, player 5 is better than player 6, or like in your case, like you're saying, like Howell, I've heard really good things about, and definitely a player that if you don't have him on your board already, that's a player that is worth a watch right now, and that's a player that we're going to be tracking throughout the entire cycle. So I definitely agree with that. So JT, we're going to get to your comment in the chat here after Andy tells us about R. Mason Thomas in his top 5. So Andy, like, R. Mason Thomas is getting a lot of buzz around draft professors. For you to have him as edge 5, tell us why you are so high on R. Mason Thomas.
Man, I'm such a big fan of this guy. I've always just had a knack for liking more designated pass rushers this early in the process, just because, they've got some flash to them. They've got some explosion that catches my eye a lot. And R. Mason Thomas definitely checks the box for that. He's explosive off the line of scrimmage. Closes to the quarterback fantastically to finish off sacks, good production numbers. He's very technically advanced, good hand usage, very good counters. Consistently high motor, natural bend and flexibility. I just saw him today put on the Defensive Player of the Year watch list throughout college football, to go back to the production note. And as a result, you just got to keep your eye on him at all times, because he's always making a play. He's always getting an offensive lineman off balance, off structure, off of everything. And that's really a testament to his pass rush arsenal. Very deep, good array of pass rush moves, good hand fighting, maintains balance all the way through a rep, prototype designated pass rusher with just elite tools in that area. Very good pad level, very good flexibility. Really, the only concerns I have with him is there's a medical red flag. He had ankle injuries in 2022 and 2023. The severity, not super sure. And he's undersized by NFL standards. But this is a guy that there's tools in place that I like him as a potential first-round guy in this draft. Granted, like you guys have said, very early on in the process, but I love the tools here with R. Mason Thomas.
Okay. So we've kind of covered a few of the players that may not be getting, I'm going to say, we always try to start the Draft Professor podcast with the players that either one person is really high on relative to everybody else in the podcast, or let's just say names that you may not hear very much. At this point, the rest of the boards, for the most part, they have the same names. They're just in a different order. So there's a comment in the chat here, Jacob, from JT Olson. So JT Olson, a draft professor. You can catch JT on Friday nights here, Draft Professor. But what do you think of Keldrick Falk and the comment from JT? Jacob, any comments on that?
Yeah, so I look at Keldrick Falk. I mean, I understand being potentially underwhelmed by him. I think that there's still a decent amount that he has to improve on. But, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, I see someone who's, relatively speaking, a higher floor edge rusher. Just the way that I see it, I see a guy who's 6'6" and 288 pounds, or at least that's what he's listed around. I think he's one of the better run defending edge rushers in this class. I think with his ability, him being as big as he is, as strong as he is, and as physical as he is, I think that, that's something that he does better than most edge rushers in this class. I think that you watch him on stunts or when he's working across an offensive tackle's face, just in general, I think he shows good spatial awareness, good generally knows what movements to make in order to exploit that advantage that he has over the offensive lineman. I think the size adjusted athleticism is going to be really good with him. Granted, you take a look at some of the other edge rushers in this class. I don't think he's as explosive as, say a TJ Parker or, a David Bailey, R. Mason Thomas, guys along those lines. But I do think that for a bigger edge rusher, he moves really well. I could see a team in, say like a base 3-4 sort of defense want to have him as a hand in the dirt defensive lineman, whether it's as, he can kick inside as a 3 technique. I can see him as a 5 tech as well. I think that historically speaking, a lot of those sort of tweener prospects have gone pretty high because of the versatility that their skill set has, because he's quicker than most defensive tackles, but he's stronger than most edge rushers. So that, and on top of that, I think he has a high motor. I think he's got pretty good instincts. That's just more in my opinion with Falk as an evaluation. I think that a lot of that's going to depend on what you like out of an edge rusher. And, some of those tweeners can be a little bit inconsistent in how they translate to the next level. Maybe they're not fast enough. Maybe they're not flexible enough, or, maybe they're, not big enough to play along the interior. So I understand being hesitant about Falk. I like him a lot. Obviously, I have, both TJ Parker and Ruben Bain, like the consistent top 2 edge rushers, or the consensus. I have those 2 over Falk, but I think there's potential. Maybe if Falk, if he drops a little bit of weight, gets a little bit quicker, turns the corner a little bit more, with a little bit more efficiency and a little bit more hip drop at the top of his arc, he could crack that top 2. But I think there's a lot to like with him personally. As far as games go, I liked his performance against California in particular. That's one where JT, if you've, watched that one and you disagree, obviously, you can feel free to let us know in the comments. But I think, that was one that I watched and I'm like, all right, I can see what the hype's about for sure.
Yeah. So Andy, where are you on Falk right now?
Yeah, overall, same exact thoughts as Jacob here. He's my edge 3 first round guy. I want him to drop some weight, 270 range, I think would be a lot better for him. In terms of plays that I really like to see from him, I remember turning on the game he had against Alabama, and like first play of the game, he's just sliding past an offensive lineman, jumping at the running back and getting him behind the line. So that's really the stuff you're getting with Keldrick Falk at an NFL level. Should be a generally elite defensive end in terms of run support. We'll see where the pass rushing goes, but this guy has so much to like as a run defender, and then developmental in the pass rush area, to where I think this guy is a top 15. I'm pretty sure I have him top 15 player in the class right now for me.
Yeah, so actually that's a good segue. So I have a question for Jacob. Jacob, if I were to look at your top 3 edges, which are TJ Parker, Ruben Bain, Keldrick Falk, on your overall board, how far down or up are they? Like are those top 3 guys in your top 10? Are they in your top 20?
Yeah, so my top 3 guys are all in my top 15. So I quickly pulled it up here because I don't remember off the top of my head. So I have TJ Parker currently as my number 4 overall prospect in this class. Ruben Bain I currently have at number 7, and then Keldrick Falk I have at number 11. So obviously things can and they will change between now and the draft. And as time passes on, I'll go through and watch more games of all these prospects to give myself a broader sample size to go off of. But I think there's a slight little bit of a gap, but it's nothing massive. I think at the end of the day, they'll all have true first round grades on my board if they continue to develop the way that they have to this point. But yeah, that's just where I have those guys currently.
Okay, so I'm going to be editing the graphic here in a minute, so that's why I took that off, so you can look at our faces here for a little bit. So, Andy, how far down your board do we have to go for like LT Overton, which is your 6th ranked edge? Like is that top 20, top 30?
Yeah. Let me get the exact number. It's definitely top 30, I'm pretty sure. Let's see. LT Overton is currently 25th on my board.
Okay.
And then after him, the next edge would be, let's see. It drops a little bit, and then in like the mid 30s, we get David Bailey. So LT Overton's the last guy I have in my top 32.
Okay. So, Chris, I've got your graphic up. And, Chris, you have a couple of edges that were unique. Do you want to talk specifically about Trey White from San Diego State, who you have as your 5th ranked edge rusher?
Purdue. So he has 12 and a half sacks. Granted, he's a shorter defensive end, but you look and it's like he has the speed, the high motor. He can generate pressure. You also hear of he as a sophomore, he was voted a team captain. He is a guy who he knows how to get to the quarterback. And I think every scout now is looking, going, okay, I need to stop quarterback X. I need to stop quarterback Y. How can I get a guy who can just rush the passer? I don't have him in my top 4 because you'll have some teams like the Chiefs, like San Diego go, well, he's too short. But you'll have some teams that'll fall in love with him, go, hey, he gets to the quarterback. He's right free. We'll figure it out. That's why I have Trey White so high, because he gets to the quarterback, he gets sacks, and he's only done this 2 years. And already, I'm looking forward to see what he does this year now that he has another year of strength conditioning, putting on weight, and understanding even more technique.
Cool. Okay, so Jacob, what's your general feel for the edge class? Like as we're coming out of the summer, do you feel like it's on par with last year, or what's your
Yeah, so I'd say there's a lot of similarities between this year's class, or as in 2026, and the 2025 class. I don't think there's an edge rusher, at least currently, who's going to measure up to the grade that I had on Abdul Carter coming out. But I think that you look at T.J. Parker, and I'm pretty high on Ruben Bain, and then Keldrick Falk as well. We mentioned the top of the show. Those are guys I think they'd go first round in last year's class. I keep saying last year's class. We're still in 2025. That just shows the the 2026 forward mindset that I'm in right now. But I think there admittedly is a little bit of a drop from my top 3 edge rushers to number 4. I know, kind of like what Andy said, I have Mateo Uiagalelei is my edge rusher number 4, as you see on that board. I have him 29th on my board. LT Overton, I have at number 5. I have him at 31. So that's a pretty big drop off from Falk, who I have at 11. But there's still a lot of value there. I think I have a good handful of guys with, who are currently in my top 50. I think have potential to rise even higher. As of right now, I have all of my top 10 edge rushers are in my top 50 on my board. And as opposed to, the 2025 draft looking now, I had 10 edge rushers within my top 50 as well. So there's a lot that lines up there. I think that in terms of, maybe top 15 value at edge, there's a little bit more. I think it's not so much like last year where, okay, Abdul Carter is going to be the consensus edge 1 for everybody. That might be a little bit different this go around. But I think you have a good handful of guys that could go first round, and a handful of guys in that day 2 sort of range that I think have the potential to really shoot up the board in due time.
Yeah, and to echo what you're saying, Jacob, generally speaking, T.J. Parker, Ruben Bain, Keldrick Falk, most of the time that I see an edge discussion, those three are like three. Most people have them as three of the top four. And then within the last week, I'm seeing a lot more love for Mateo Ugalele from Oregon. I would say, like, if we were having this conversation a month ago, I didn't see him as high a month ago as I see him today. Even though no games have been played in that range, it seems like people are watching him more. They're liking him more. They like his ceiling more. I think might be also a fair way to say that. So looking at the boards, Andy, what edges do you see as a 3-down edge versus what edges do you see as they're a designated pass rusher and I really don't want them trying to hold the edge against the run? Where do you kind of draw the line? Which prospects come to mind?
Yeah, this is a class where just to me, I feel like there's a lot of designated guys in an area. You know, you're either going to get a guy that's awesome against the run and not that good against the pass, or awesome against the pass and not good against the run. There's just not a lot of well-rounded guys this year. But I like the top three guys I like against both. And I know we mentioned Keldrick Falk as like what are we going to have this guy be? I think he's excellent in run support. He'll get there in pass support. Mateo Uiagalelei, I would also be willing to put out there in 3 downs. And then we get to R. Mason Thomas, who's a designated pass rusher. LT Overton, who I would be comfortable having on 3 downs, but definitely more lopsided towards the run than the pass. David Bailey, designated pass rusher kind of guy. Tyreek Sapp, that's more of a guy you want in run support and that I don't really love on, a 3rd down. Anto Saka, that's a guy who I think could grow into a 3-down role. But there's just not a ton of tape on him. There's not a ton of high volume tape on him, I should say. Cassius Howell needs to develop. Deny Dennis Sutton, he's an interesting one because there is a lot of tape on him, and he was a guy that was expected to go last year. But ultimately, I'm not as high on him as an overall player, but I do think he could hold his own in 3 downs if, a team does start him. Mikael Kamara, that's a guy who I generally think could hold his own in 3 downs, but I think he's better against the run. And then Yakis and Okunlola, both more pass rushing guys. And Llewellyn, who I finally got to today. Max Llewellyn was my final watch on this list. But he's also just the one who could grow into a 3-down role, but we also haven't seen him play more than 300 defensive snaps in a season, so we really just don't know.
So, Jacob, where are you in the as you're looking at your list and you say, that's really only a player I want on 3rd down? Is there any players that you would want to point out in that regard?
Yeah. So, I mean, looking at my list compared to, what Andy was touching on, I agree with a lot of his evaluations. I think that, we have, a decent amount of the same guys. It's just in different orders. And I think that he's touched really well on all those guys. I think looking at my top 15, at least, 3rd down specialists, I guess, as far as the, pass rusher, a little bit more oriented for their pass rushing ability, I'd look at Anto Saka, Cassius Howell. I'd look at Patrick Payton. I have that high. I think there's a lot of potential with him, but he was much more inconsistent than I would have liked last year. So I don't think he's a true 3-down talent at this stage, but I like the flashes that he displayed at Florida State. David Bailey fits that role as well, R. Mason Thomas, and then Damon Wilson. So those are the guys I'd say are more pass rushing specialists. Deny Dennis Sutton, I think that's another guy where I think he has some really impressive physical attributes. He just hasn't fully maximized that yet. I think that, there's definitely buzz about him entering the draft last year. I think that he made the right decision to, stick around at Penn State for another year. He's someone where I think he's a little bit flashier as a pass rusher, but the potential's there for him to grow into a 3-down role. So just off of my top 15, those are, the guys I mentioned earlier, those are probably the ones that I'd stick into more of, at least right out of the gate. They're more of third down guys. They're more of pass rushing specialists more than anything.
And Chris, how about you? When you look at your list, do you think your list is 3 down edges? Do you think that there's some designated pass rushers that are ranked really high?
I'd also see some guys who probably could be a position change. Like David Bailey is a guy who, if he's an edge, a pure like defensive end edge, he's mostly for third down. I could see a team go and look and go, well, he played linebacker. Let's see if we can use him as that. The one guy I like who I think has the possibility is Bo Atkinson, especially now that he's transferred to Ohio State. I mean, he was productive in North Carolina. He does everything well, but not great. But he's 6'6". He usually weighs at 255, 265. And you look and you go, all right, if he puts on another 20 pounds of muscle, is all of a sudden he could be a guy who you can play at all 3 downs. He can stuff the run, rush the pass. Not great, but he's a guy like a George Karlaftis where it's like, all right, the motor, the intelligence to be able to read the run and the pass, that's what makes him high for teams that look and go, well, we can move around places.
Okay. So a couple of other questions I have, and we've touched on this a little bit. Like Jacob, you mentioned like LT Overton, you said was hovering around player 30. Jacob, do you think all 15 of the players that you've listed are day 2 or better? Or do you think that somewhere on your list there's a drop off where that's a day 3 player?
I mean, I look at those guys. I think all of them have potential to go day 2 or higher. I don't know if all of them will. Just looking at it, going through my top 15, there are a couple guys where I have them more there based off of upside, more so than what they are as a finished product. I look at Patrick Payton as another one of those guys. I have him in my top 15 because of the upside, but I saw the comment earlier that Brian sent in. He hasn't put it all together. And I'm betting on what he can do or what he's shown he can do in flashes. But I think it's entirely possible that he ends up a day 3 pick. We'll see how that turns out. Obviously, there's a lot left in this whole, there's a whole season to play. I think that probably 11 down is where I can really start to go either way. Like David Bailey, I do have some play strength concerns with him. I know Chris mentioned him as a potential position change sort of prospect. R. Mason Thomas, I think eventually he'll climb up. I want to see one more good year out of him, but I like what I see. Wilson, I know I already talked about. Mikhail Kamara, I love watching his tape. I'll be honest. I think that's something where, I went back and watched him a little bit at James Madison, and then obviously what he did last year at Indiana was, really impressive stuff. I don't know how long his arms are going to be. I look at his tape, and there are some instances where he looks, a little bit shorter. I mean, obviously he's listed around 6'1", 265. He's more of a stout edge rusher than anything. But I think that lack of length can hurt him sometimes, especially in the Big Ten. I think he wins more with his pass rushing intelligence more so than his physical attributes. And I think he's flexible, but I don't think he's an elite athlete. I think that, he's got solid power, but sometimes that shorter frame can hurt him sometimes, and the lack of length can hurt him sometimes. So I have him more as like an early day 3 sort of prospect. But again, I think that he's a guy where, I love watching him play. I could realistically see that 11 to 15 range rising up into day 2, but that's probably where the cutoff is for me.
So Andy, how about you? Where was the cutoff on your board between who you see as day 2 and who you could see fall into day 3?
Yeah, it's obviously tough now because it's August. But I think the range where I start to question is probably around 11, 12 in particular. I question, Mikhail Kamara, everything that Jacob said with him. Max Llewellyn, I want to see, how he looks with a high snap output season. I want to see all of that on display for him to be a day 2 guy. Gabe Yakis, I hope that's how you pronounce it. I want to see his pass rush arsenal get a little deeper. I wish he was a more fluid athlete. Doesn't have a ton of fluidity in my eyes, but there's a ton of good strength, good power there. Versatile across multiple alignments. He was a Feldman's freak athlete in 2023. Good burst off the line of scrimmage, consistently high motor. So has the stuff to go in day 2. And then Samuel Okunlola, who we touched on, that's definitely a projection. Me saying he could be a top 100, top 3 round guy. But obviously everything in place right now says that he's probably a 4th or 5th round guy. So I would probably say that 12 range is my cutoff to where I start questioning.
Okay. So, Andy, do you have any questions on the edge group or on the players you evaluated that you want to ask Jacob? I'm putting you on the spot there. I know that can be tough.
Yeah. I'm really curious. I'm really curious to hear more about Mateo Uiagalelei in your eyes.
Yeah, so I look at him and I'm intrigued by a lot of the physicality that he brings to the table. I look at it, he's a bigger edge rusher, not quite Keldrick Falk range of nearing 290, but he's, if I had to get, north of 270 or somewhere around that range, I see someone who can, he can rush inside, he can rush outside. I think that provides a lot of versatility for defensive line and for, coaching staffs in the NFL in general. I think he's got, at least when I watch him on tape, obviously we'll see how the measurements play out once the pre-draft process goes on. But I look at him, he seems to have good length. He's someone who can, lock out offensive tackles away from the inside of his frame. I like what he brings to the table in terms of how he strings moves together. I think that, oftentimes at the collegiate level, you see edge rushers where they have one move that they stick to and it's like, oh crap, that didn't work. Now what? I think Uiagalelei does a good job of, having an understanding of what counter to work off of. So say if one move doesn't work, all right, now judging by this offensive lineman's stance, judging by the footwork, the weight distribution, how can I rebound and how can I at least put pressure on the quarterback? So I like the power that he brings, the pass rushing intelligence that he brings. Short area quickness is good. Again, I don't think he's like an elite athlete by any means for an edge rusher, at least in terms of his flexibility. Turning the corner, he's not going to be the guy who consistently wins with those, outside speed rushes. And I think that, the lack of elite flexibility can hurt his pad level from time to time. But to me, that's another dude where I think he's just got a high floor more so than anything. And I feel pretty good that with his, how willing he is to take blocks head on and his know-how for how to shed blocks, I think he'll be a good starter in the league. Is he going to be elite? I trend towards no in the NFL, but I do feel pretty confident, at least going off of what we saw from him last year, that he's going to be a good starter in the league.
Chris, do you have another question queued up for Jacob?
Yeah, and it's funny. One of the guys I was thinking about this, Jacob, as I was talking to you, Cassius Howell. I mean, just like Shamar Stewart, people say, "Oh, why does he have enough sacks? Where's the production?" How tough is it for us when we're trying to figure this out? And we also got to figure out, are the players hindered because of defensive scheme? Are they asking, either Howell or White or whoever we have here, just contain? Don't swim upstream. Make sure a quarterback doesn't get around. Limit big plays. Like, how do we figure that out when everybody wants to know why don't we have sacks? And the players can look and go, well, this is my scheme. I'm not allowed to freelance.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good question. And one thing that I go back to is I know specifically like Florida's defensive line. I know they run a lot of, like read and react along the defensive line more so than, hey, just pin your ears back, shoot up field, go get the quarterback. they tend to teach their defensive line, like, all right, here, let's be a little bit more cautious off the line of scrimmage. And I think in some instances that can make it tougher for us to evaluate, all right, how explosive truly is this defensive lineman if you're doing that read and react sort of rushing. I bring them up. It's, different with Cassius Howell, but just as an example of sometimes, like you said, these players aren't necessarily schemed to all their strengths. I'd say with Howell, there's some instances where, I mean, obviously, like, I like what he brings as a speed rusher. His sort of rushing style to me is very different from what we saw with other edge rushers at A&M, like Shamar Stewart and Nick Scorton. Those are more, power-based guys. Scorton more with, technique, and then Stewart more with that raw burst and power combination. So I think a lot of it just comes down to, like you said, what he's being asked to do. If it's more so of a, priority on, all right, let's, set the edge, keep contain here, as opposed to, all right, just, get after the quarterback. So I think that's definitely something that plays a role in this, evaluation process. It can be a little bit difficult to play out, but when I see the flashes of what Howell brings to the table, and I know what he is as an athlete, that makes me feel pretty good to where I like him, maybe a little bit more as like a 3-4 stand-up edge rusher. He can rush with his hand in the dirt, but I think, stand-up roles are better for him. I think that if there's a team in the NFL that can really maximize his skill set and, other defensive line skill sets in general, then that's when you can start to see that potential start to get tapped into.
Okay, so if the chat has questions for the panel, okay, there we go. So Sam Teets, is there an edge on your board that you enjoy watching and you hope improves for 2025?
That's a good question. I mean, there are a couple guys. I know we went through our top 15, but I look in like that 15 to 20 range on my board, and I see a couple guys where it's like, all right, I think they could be something in the NFL. I don't know about full-time starters, but they could certainly contribute. Another one of those, a little bit light in the pants, but explosive edge rushers that I have in that 15 to 20 range, Joshua Josephs, edge rusher out of Tennessee. He's someone where, going back, it caught my eye before I watched him. He's the only returning edge rusher with, PFF grades in run defense and the pass rush above 85. Obviously, that's in, a little bit more of a rotational role, so you take that with a grain of salt. But I see, impressive athleticism off the line of scrimmage. I see a red-hot motor, the willingness to, keep hand fighting and the willingness to chase down defenders as a backside run defender in pursuit. I think he can cover a little bit as well. Some edge rushers, not necessarily too great at moving around in space and dropping back into zone coverage. I think that's something Josephs can do as well. Again, I think he's got a lot to prove. His power needs to improve. He needs to improve a little bit. I don't know for sure how much more weight he can put on. He's listed around 6'3", 240 pounds. He might be a little bit shorter than that 6'3" mark. He might always be a little bit more undersized for an edge rusher, but I think if he can even just get a little bit better in terms of his play strength and his ability to win with speed to power, I think he's someone who can definitely crack the top 15. And another guy I wanted to bring up where he's more of a high floor type of guy. I like watching Maurice Westmoreland from Tulane. That's someone where, he's got some experience as an off-ball linebacker, but I don't think that's, where he's going to play at the next level. I think he's just okay in terms of his athleticism in space, but I like the drive that he generates out of his lower half at the point of attack. I think he's got a good bull rush, good long arm. I think, again, I go back to the physicality. I see the pad level, the weight distribution, the ability to win with proper leverage through his pads and his hand placement. I like that a lot too. Westmoreland, totally different reasons that I like him compared to Josephs, where Joseph's, I just look at that athleticism and the upside, and Westmoreland, I look at, all right, this is someone I think can contribute in a rotation. I don't think he's ever going to be like a great starter by any means, but if you want just, quality edge depth on day 3, Maurice Westmoreland's a guy that I like in that 15 to 20 range as well.
Okay. So first of all, Brian, you've been here like every night this week. So like that's not lost on me. So thank you. So Jacob, Wesley Williams out of Duke. Any thoughts on him?
Okay, so I'll admit I haven't gotten around to watching Wesley Williams yet. He's someone that I have on my watch list currently, but unfortunately I haven't gotten around to him. There are a couple guys. I know Max Llewellyn's another guy that I haven't watched yet. He's on the watch list. I've heard good things about him, but I haven't actually gotten around to digging into the tape on him. But I know that Wesley Williams is someone that I'm planning on getting around to probably later this week. So unfortunately, I don't have anything on him right now.
Andy or Chris, have either of you had a chance to watch Wesley Williams? No, so that's a no for Andy.
I have not. No, I'm still catching up with other guys. I'm focused on the smaller schools because we forget a lot of these guys come from the Boise States, San Diego State. So we just go, well, they are what they are. Is it big fish, small pond? As I said, right now I'm a guy I'm falling in love with, even though I'm not sure where he is as in position, is Jaden Virgin Morgan. But again, it's like you and I have talked about it. We need to see what they do against top competition, because we could mention they have a speed, the size, the skill, they have the hand technique, but at the end of the day, it's like, well, how do you do when you're taking on an A player? How do you do when you're taking on Oregon instead of Air Force or Fresno State? That's always the drawback here. Is a lot of these players we like, a lot of them are from the big conferences, so we see they do well against Alabama, Georgia. I mean, that's what, to me, I loved about Keldrick Falk. When when the lights shone on against Georgia and Alabama, he delivered. That's the question we have with some of these players. Like, all right, a Trey White or even a Samuel Okunola. Like, all right, how are they going to do when they had to play better opponents rather than a Colorado State?
Yeah. So, Brian, we have covered Wesley Williams on the podcast before. You want to go back and you want to find a podcast that Brian Maffei did, and it either would have been a Sunday show or when Brian did his top 20 edges, Wesley Williams was on Brian Maffei's top 20. So at minimum, one draft professor, well, I shouldn't say one. I know that Brian Maffei's watched him, and Bill Sparks has watched everyone. So specifically, Brian, I would either watch the podcast with Brian Maffei or reach out to Bill Sparks at Draft Professors. I guarantee both of those two have watched Wesley Williams already. And what Draft Professors is gearing up for is we take all of these top 15 lists that we do for every position group, and we have comprised a master watch list. And starting the second week of October, we're breaking down the watch list 8 players at a time. So like October 5th, we'll cover 8 edges. October 12th, we're covering 8 more. The 19th, we're going to cover 8 more. We're going to keep going. And by the time we get to about December 14th, we will have covered 80 defensive linemen in the draft class. Okay. Now, on average, only about 55 or 60 defensive linemen get drafted. So we're confident we're going to cover most of the players in the draft. Obviously, it's impossible to get everyone, but we're confident we will get most. This is what Draft Professor does every year. So if you're new to Draft Professor, guaranteed that Wesley Williams will be covered on more than one podcast, because we have 3 different podcasts covering the defensive line group. So I guarantee he'll be covered on Sundays, guaranteed he'll be covered on Mondays, guaranteed he'll be covered on Wednesdays. And actually, one of the Wednesday podcasters was Newt. He was in the chat. So Newt Weston right here will be one of the Draft Professors that will be covering Wesley Williams starting in October. So why don't we pause here for a quick second? Jacob, it is your first time on a Draft Professor podcast. I have followed you for a long time, but if you are not following Jacob, you should go do that right now. But Jacob, tell everybody why they should follow you or what they're going to see from a draft content standpoint if they follow you.
Yeah, so I will say that I take a lot of pride in so admittedly a lot of my audience comes down to being Chicago Bears fans. I realize that that's what a lot of the people that follow my stuff are the most interested in, but I take pride in, again, doing this year-round draft evaluation process. And that's something where, at least from a Bears slant, that's something that you're not going to see very much of anywhere else. And that's something that I believe it's a very specific niche that I've tried to weave my way into. But it's something I take a lot of pride in. And so you'll see sporadic NFL draft content and analysis over the course of the full 12 months over the year, in addition to my Chicago Bears analysis. And I'm always watching prospects. So even if I'm not tweeting about prospects at any moment, I have, hundreds of prospects in my Rolodex that I have watched to this point and will be watching more down the stretch. So again, if you like NFL draft content, humbly recommend giving me a shot, shooting me a follow. I love talking about the draft, and especially at this stage where I don't have as many people, in my mentions and stuff like that talking about the draft. If you send me anything about the 2026 class, I will answer it. I realize there aren't, in the NFL sphere, I guess there aren't a ton of people who cover the draft year round. And I think that that's part of why I've liked being on this show so much, is to be around people who are, constantly evaluating and adding players and, doing that summer scouting, which I love so much. But yeah, if you, again, another person who's doing year-round draft analysis as well as Chicago Bears coverage, definitely recommend checking me out. My Twitter X handle is under my name. It's Jacob Infante 24. And you can check out my Patreon as well, which is patreon.com/Jacob Infante. You can see my whole big board in its entirety if you subscribe, as well as my entire watch list. And, throughout the year, I'll be doing a whole bunch more exclusive content. So recommend checking that out as well.
Yeah. So Andy, before I jump to you so that you can let everybody know, let's talk about all the different people that are covering the draft year round. So Brian, you are here, like I said, nearly every night. So it's good to see you. Sam Teets, you were on a podcast with us on Sunday. Sam will be on 2 podcasts with us next week. If you're not in Sam's Substack, you're not doing it right. So go ahead and find Sam's Substack. Okay, we got Brian. I'm scrolling up. Newt Weston, another draft professor. So Newt, thanks for stopping by, covering the draft year round. JT Olson, another draft professor, covering the draft year round. You can catch JT on his podcast on Sundays, on Fridays. That being said, Andy, let all the fine people know what kind of content you make.
Yeah, I do a lot of draft stuff on Twitter, and with football season finally here, preseason football, the best time of the year, I'm doing a lot of Broncos stuff for all the Broncos followers, big Broncos fan. But yeah, I also really love just talking about the draft year round, talking about all kinds of football, truthfully, that's just what I do. So if you want to follow me, Andy NFL right there.
Cool. Chris.
Well, I'm getting new to scouting here, so I'm not like you. A lot of you guys here who are experts, but I do love talking football. I also love talking to people, whether it's anywhere between college football writers, actors, wrestlers, boxers, because I love telling stories. I love finding out why people do this. Why, whether it's Jacob Infante, whether it's Mason Beals from Elkhorn, to even whether it's we have recently had a guy who's covering the UFC. Why do you do this? What makes you have the passion? Why is this something that for you spend hours and time and details in crafting? So you can check me out at lastcallpodcast.com. We're definitely going to be talking a lot more college football now that and pro football. Now that the season is finally started, once preseason is done with, you can check me also on twitter.com/lastcallChrisC, and also Facebook, last.call.520. So I've enjoyed this, you guys. And I've learned actually from hanging out with you guys the last even 6 months just on your chats. Like, okay, this is what I'm looking for. This is what I need to see. And this is what I need to learn. Because usually like, oh, yeah, a guy who had a couple sacks. That's great. Now I'm like, oh, placement, footwork, swim moves. I'm slowly getting into it. I'm learning from you guys here.
Thanks, Chris. So you can follow the channel at NFL Draft Fanatic, no I in Fanatic. It's the same on X as it is on YouTube. My name is Jim. I am the person behind that Draft Professor logo on the Draft Professor Twitter. What you get on this channel is daily draft content. So we cover the draft every day. Some of the schedule is scrolling at the bottom. Tomorrow, we're podcasting, for example, what is the impact of second round fully guaranteed contracts if the player is injured? So like Benjamin Morrison, does he go in round 2 if they know they got to give him a fully guaranteed contract? We're going to pontificate that for 55 minutes tomorrow night. Thursday, 2 podcasts. The early podcast, Owen and Taylor and Steve will be talking about the corners and safeties. So those gentlemen have not built their boards yet. So they pick a couple of players at some positions and they podcast their reactions live. It's actually kind of funny. So that's pretty cool. And then there will be another podcast that is Thursday night. They're going to be covering the linebacker class. Friday night, Bill Sparks, Durst, Anthony Russo are going to be covering their top 50s. Saturday morning, we're previewing week 0. Sunday, we have another agent coming on the station. So if you didn't know this, agents love draft content at this time of year because they need to know who are players 101 to 300. That's where they're going to make their money. Everybody knows who the top 50 players are for the most part. Most of the top 50 boards are the same with the exception of about 7 players. But the players 101 to 250 or 101 to 300, agents want to know who those players are because they want to represent them. So we've had 2 agents come on the station already. The third one is coming on Sunday, and we have a 4th one coming on further down the cycle. And then once September hits, we're going to start previewing college football games, and we're going to tell you all the draftable players that are in Texas A&M and Notre Dame. And we're going to be able to cover them all in 55 minutes. We'll talk about the matchups. When you're watching the tape after the game, here's the matchups of draftable player against draftable player that you should be paying attention to. So we have draft content. We are going to be going 2 podcasts a day starting next week all the way up until the draft in April. That's what this station does. We could not do this without people like Andy that show up once a week, right? So there's 24 people at Draft Professor, just like Andy. They show up once a week, and that's what makes this channel work. So Andy, my hat's off to you. You made this happen. I also want to give a shout out to Randall. Randall was supposed to be here. His son got into an accident at school, so he has spent the night in the ER. I know Randall would have rather been on the podcast. It just didn't work out. But Randall has been with Draft Professor literally since the day I came up with the idea. So Randall, I hope Noah is doing better, and I will see you on the podcast again on Tuesday. But that being said, we have been going for close to an hour. Give Andy a follow. Give Chris Connor a follow. Give Jacob Infante a follow. Please and thank you. For the 85 podcasters at the Draft Professor, thank you for watching tonight, everybody. It has been a very good show, and we'll see you on a podcast again tomorrow night.